The old woman didn't choose the abandoned mine. The winter chose it for her. When Martha Ellis disappeared into the darkness with only her old shepherd dog beside her, the entire settlement assumed she had finally surrendered to despair. People shook their heads. Some laughed. Others whispered that the cold would finish what old age had started. No one imagined she would return. At 72 years old, Martha had already survived more hardship than most people could imagine. She buried her husband 20 years earlier after a logging accident. Her only son moved east looking for work and never came back. Letters stopped. Then years passed. Eventually, she stopped waiting. She lived quietly in a tiny cabin outside the Colorado mining town of Red Creek. She grew vegetables in summer, sewed clothing during winter, asked very little from anyone. Then the mine closed. For decades, Red Creek survived because of silver. When the veins finally ran dry, the mining company packed its equipment and left. Families followed. Stores closed. Jobs disappeared. The remaining townspeople became protective of every resource, especially firewood, especially food, especially housing. When Martha's landlord decided to sell her little cabin to a younger family, nobody objected. The old woman can stay with relatives. She had none. She'll find somewhere. She didn't. By late November, she owned only a handcart, a few blankets, several cooking pots, and her faithful shepherd dog, Ranger. The townspeople watched silently as she pushed the cart through falling snow. Nobody offered a room. Nobody stopped her. Only Ranger remained beside her. The old dog never walked ahead, never behind, always beside her left leg, as if making sure she never walked alone. The trail eventually climbed toward the abandoned Silver Eagle mine. Children often played near the entrance during summer. Adults avoided it. Old mines collapsed. Old mines flooded. Old mines killed people. At least, that was the story. Ranger suddenly stopped walking. His ears lifted. Then he pulled gently toward the entrance. Martha frowned. "What is it?" The dog barked once, then disappeared inside. She sighed. "Don't wander too far." Lantern in hand, Martha followed. The first tunnel looked exactly as expected. Cold, dusty, silent. Old wooden beams supported the ceiling. Rusty rails disappeared into darkness. Nothing unusual. Then Ranger barked again, this time deeper inside. Martha continued. The tunnel curved sharply, then widened. Something unexpected appeared. Shelves. Dozens of them. Hand-built wooden shelves lining both sides of the passage. Many remained surprisingly sturdy. Some still held empty jars. Others contained broken crates. The shelves stretched farther than her lantern could illuminate. Martha stopped. This wasn't just a mine. She moved carefully forward. Additional rooms opened from the main tunnel. Storage chambers. Tool rooms. Workshops. Everything abandoned decades earlier. Yet remarkably dry. The deeper she explored, the warmer the air became. Not warm enough to remove her coat, just noticeably less cold than outside. The mountain insulated everything. Then she found the bunkhouse. Behind an old timber door sat a large chamber containing rows of wooden bunks built into the walls. Blankets had long since rotted away, but the frames remained solid. Nearby stood an enormous stone fireplace. Someone had once expected dozens of miners to live underground. Martha slowly smiled. This place wasn't forgotten. It was prepared. Over the next several days, she transformed the bunkhouse. Broken boards repaired shelves. Old crates became tables. Collapsed timbers became firewood. The giant fireplace worked perfectly after cleaning the chimney. Most importantly, the mine stayed remarkably stable. Outside temperatures dropped below zero. Inside, the air barely changed. The surrounding mountain trapped warmth. One small fire heated the chamber for hours. Ranger quickly claimed his favorite place beside the hearth. For the first time in weeks, Martha slept comfortably. Meanwhile, back in Red Creek, rumors spread. Children insisted they saw smoke rising from the abandoned mine. Adults dismissed the stories. Probably hunters. No one's living there. It's impossible. One afternoon, curiosity overcame the blacksmith. He hiked to the mine expecting to find nothing. Instead, he found Martha sweeping the tunnel. The shelves stood neatly organized. Jars filled with dried herbs lined one wall. Firewood stacked neatly against another. The fireplace crackled warmly. The blacksmith stared in disbelief. "You actually live here?" Martha smiled. "So it seems." He looked around again. "I thought mines were freezing." "So did I. He removed one glove and touched the stone wall. It felt cool, not icy. His expression changed. This place stays warmer. The mountain helps. He slowly walked through the chambers, examining the shelves, the storage rooms, the old bunks. Finally he laughed. Well, Martha raised an eyebrow. What? I suppose this is the nicest mine I've ever seen. Word spread rapidly. Soon visitors climbed the trail almost daily. Most expected disaster. Instead, they found a remarkably comfortable underground home. Some still laughed, mostly because living in a mine sounded ridiculous. One merchant joked, "So when are you moving back above ground?" Martha smiled. "When the mountain asks me to." Nobody understood the answer. December arrived. Snow deepened. Old miners began noticing something troubling. The mountains collected snow unusually early. Animal tracks vanished. Elk migrated weeks sooner than normal. Then one evening, an elderly retired foreman named George Harlan visited the mine. George spent 40 years underground. He understood mountains better than almost anyone. He studied the entrance carefully, walked through every chamber, examined the support beams, then quietly nodded. Solid. Martha poured him coffee. You approve? George looked toward the ceiling. I trust old mines. She smiled. Most people don't. They should. His smile disappeared. The mountain already proved this place once. She frowned. What do you mean? George stared toward the snowy entrance. When the great avalanche hit 40 years ago. He paused. This was the only part of the mountain nobody lost. Silence filled the chamber. Outside, snow began falling harder. George stood slowly. If I were you. He looked around the enormous underground shelter. I'd make room for visitors. Martha watched him leave. She didn't fully understand his warning. But something about the old miner's voice unsettled her. That night, Ranger suddenly lifted his head from beside the fireplace. His ears pointed toward the tunnel entrance. Then he growled softly. Outside, beyond the darkness, the wind began to roar. And somewhere high above Red Creek, the mountain was preparing to test every home before winter was over. George Harlan's warning proved accurate. The blizzard struck before sunrise. Not as scattered snow, as a wall. Wind roared down the mountains with terrifying force, carrying snow so thick that the buildings of Red Creek disappeared before noon. Martha stood near the mine entrance beside Ranger. The old shepherd growled softly as the storm intensified. She looked toward town. Only a handful of rooftops remained visible. Then even those vanished. The mountain had swallowed the valley. Inside the abandoned mine, however, almost nothing changed. The heavy timber supports blocked the wind. The surrounding rock held a steady temperature. The enormous fireplace warmed the bunkhouse with only a modest fire. The shelves lining the tunnels remained dry. The mountain protected everything. Martha smiled quietly. George was right. The first knock came late that afternoon. She opened the old timber door. The blacksmith stood outside, barely able to remain upright against the wind. Behind him were his wife and grandson. Snow coated every inch of their clothing. Our chimney collapsed. His voice trembled. We have nowhere else. Martha stepped aside. Come in. The little boy entered first. His eyes widened as he looked around. Long rows of shelves. Warm lantern light. Dry stone floors. The giant fireplace glowing in the center of the chamber. This is inside the mountain. Martha smiled. It is now. By evening another family arrived. Then another. Then two miners. Then an elderly couple. Word spread quickly through Red Creek. The abandoned mine wasn't collapsing. It wasn't flooding. It wasn't haunted. It was warm. By the third day of the blizzard, more than 30 people occupied the underground shelter. Fortunately, the mine had been built for many more. The old bunkhouse easily accommodated everyone. Storage rooms became kitchens. Workshops became sleeping areas. The endless wooden shelves found throughout the tunnels finally served their purpose again. Martha organized everything carefully. One section held food. Another stored lanterns. Others held blankets, firewood, tools, and medical supplies. The old mine transformed into a functioning underground village. Every person had work. Every person contributed. The atmosphere changed. People who had ignored Martha now followed her instructions without question. One evening the town merchant approached her quietly. He stared at the shelves stretching down the tunnel. I laughed. Martha looked up from stacking jars. I remember. He lowered his head. I thought you had gone mad. She smiled gently. So did I. The merchant laughed softly, then grew serious. You saved us. Martha shook her head. The mine did. Outside, the storm refused to weaken. Day after day, the snowfall continued. The entrance gradually disappeared beneath enormous drifts. Fortunately, old ventilation shafts built by miners decades earlier continued bringing fresh air into the tunnels. George had inspected them years before retirement. Without realizing it, he had helped preserve the refuge. On the sixth day, Ranger suddenly barked. Everyone fell silent. The old dog sprinted toward an unexplored side passage. Martha followed. The tunnel narrowed before opening into another forgotten chamber. Unlike the others, this room remained untouched. Dust covered everything. Against one wall stood dozens of wooden barrels. Nearby sat sealed crates. George joined her carrying a lantern. His eyebrows rose immediately. Emergency supplies. Martha frowned. For miners. George nodded. They prepared for cave-ins. Together they carefully opened the containers. Inside were preserved foods. Blankets sealed in waxed canvas. Candles. Medical supplies. Coal. Even spare mining tools. Many items remained perfectly usable after decades underground. George smiled. The old foreman planned better than anyone realized. Those supplies changed everything. Food shortages vanished. Warm bedding became available for every family. The forgotten storage room extended the settlement's survival by weeks. When Martha returned to the main chamber carrying fresh blankets, people stared in amazement. It just keeps getting bigger. She smiled. So does hope. The blizzard finally ended on the 12th morning. Silence replaced the endless roar of wind. Several volunteers dug carefully through the buried entrance. Hours later, sunlight poured into the tunnel. The first people stepped outside, then stopped. Nobody recognized Red Creek. Entire buildings had disappeared beneath snow. Barn roofs barely showed above towering drifts. The main street no longer existed. Only chimney tops marked where homes once stood. The mine entrance, built into the mountainside, had escaped the worst of the drifting snow. The underground refuge remained completely intact. For the next several weeks, it became the center of recovery. Families cooked there. Workers stored tools there. Children attended lessons in the old bunkhouse while parents rebuilt homes. The abandoned mine had become the heart of Red Creek. Spring eventually reached the mountains. Snow melted. Cabins slowly emerged. Life returned. One afternoon, the townspeople gathered outside the mine. The mayor stood before everyone holding a carved wooden sign. He handed it to Martha. She read the words quietly. The shelves that saved Red Creek. She laughed. I only walked inside. George stepped forward. No. He looked toward the endless shelves disappearing into the darkness. You saw a home where everyone else saw danger. Months later, visitors began arriving from neighboring mining towns. Not to search for silver. To study the refuge. Engineers examined the ventilation system. Builders copied the storage rooms. Communities converted abandoned mines into emergency shelters instead of sealing them forever. Whenever people asked Martha how she thought of living underground, she always gave the same answer. I didn't. She smiled at Ranger, lying peacefully beside the entrance. He did. The old shepherd lifted his head and wagged his tail as children laughed nearby. Years earlier, those same tunnels echoed with the sound of miners searching for silver. Now they echoed with families, laughter, and life. The place everyone called a death trap had become the safest home in the valley. And the old woman everyone laughed at became the one person no one ever doubted again.